Welcome to the Afternoon Report. I'm Elena Jakes. Today we're going to discuss gender stereotypes, more specifically in films and television. With me here is Laurel, Tristan, Alani, and David. Up first, we'll discuss how traditional female roles are portrayed in Ella Enchanted. Ella is often told what to do rather than having complete freedom. David, what did you see in the female stereotypes in the movie you watched?
Let's see, I watched Fuller House. It's the Netflix remake of the original Full House. And so what I found interesting about this is that sometimes it reflects traditional gender roles, but not always. So for example, in this one, this is sort of a traditional gender role here, is that now that the father of this family has passed away, the mother's now left in charge. So instead of I lost my train of thought, but she's kind of the head of the household now. You know, mother stays home and takes care of the kids. That's kind of a traditional thing.
Okay. And Laura, you watched the Rugrats movie, so
I did.
You want to talk about that?
So in the Rugrats movie, women are portrayed as being like domestic and homemakers and just maternal, and they are they wear traditionally like feminine clothes, so dresses, skirts, and there are actually two women who work outside of the home, and they're actually successful as doctors and businesswomen. And then also there's like the stereotype that women need to be saved. So it's kind of like a mixture of stereotypes in the film.
Okay. So Lonnie, how did the Gilmore Girls revival portray females?
So one of the things that I definitely noticed is that the women in the show embodied the idea that women are very talkative. And so throughout the episode, most of the men had short, a couple second lines, whereas the women had long monologue, essentially length lines. And so there were two specific portions within the episode that the main character Lorelai had like 3 to 5 minute portions where she was basically talking only herself. And then another stereotype that women had is that they are like sneaky or manipulative. And so throughout the entire episode, Lorelai's mother doesn't really talk to her. She kind of just like ignores everything that she says. But then towards the end, she basically starts to listen to her, and she's like, I'm going to start going to a therapist. But then she, because she starts talking to Lorelai, she's like, I want you to come with me, but in reality, she just wants Lorelai to go to a therapist. And so she kind of like was manipulative in that way.
And Tristan, you watched American Pie, so what were the stereotypes you saw?
Yeah, in terms of how women are portrayed in it, at first they're very stereotypical in that high school age, college age girls kind of way, where they're very concerned with their appearance and they're hesitant towards sex and they're very gossipy. And in fact, one of the male characters, Finch, uses it to his advantage in the sense where he tries to spread rumors about how good he is in bed by paying one girl to spread that rumor around and using that gossip to his advantage.
So for the movie that I watched Ella Enchanted, and she is living in this fairy tale land. So typically you'd see, you know, someone that's like very princessy and very like, you know, looks at, we look at her for her beauty, but she was seen as someone that was like very intelligent. So that's kind of different how people portrayed Ella in that movie. So yeah. All right, so thank you guys all for your insight. Really interesting things to consider. We will be right back. Welcome back. Next up, we'll be discussing how traditional male stereotypes are portrayed in the media. Laurel, did you see any powerful male figures in the Rugrats?
I actually didn't. So men are portrayed as having like stereotypically manly jobs. So they're like engineers, inventors, they do welding, stuff like that. But also they're portrayed as having squabbles with each other and getting easily overwhelmed by parenting. So I don't think that's really powerful portrayal of them.
All right, so Lonnie, what did you see in the Gilmore Girls?
One thing that I think of when I think of male stereotypes is that men are portrayed as handymen. And so in the episode that I watched, Luke, who is one of the other main characters, is walking around a funeral reception just like without being asked, looking at all the stuff in the house and like, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix this, even though the owner of the house didn't ask him to do so. And another thing that I notice is that men tend to overpower women within the show. And so there's one of the characters named Kirk who starts a rideshare business and it's called Uber, but it's like 3 O's instead of a U. And so he does that, and Lorelai tells him, like, you can't do that. It's a trademarked name. You'll get a lawsuit. But throughout the whole episode, he doesn't listen to her until the end when he gets approached by the Uber lawsuit lawyers. And then he's like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do now. And then he stops it. But it shows how he just kind of ignores the women's perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I know in the original series, the two main characters kind of seem like incompetent of like things like you said with Luke, going around and doing all the handyman things. So they always were like, I can't do it because I'm a girl. So can you like help us fix the oven or whatever? So I think that's interesting. Tristan, what about you? You watched American Pie. What did you see with the male figures?
Yeah, well, it's like what Alani said with the men kind of don't listen. I mean, you could say that same thing about American Pie and the 5 guys in there where they're all united by this pact to get laid by the end of the end of prom, and they graduate. And of course, one of them, Stifler, has already, achieved that. And then the other 4 are all desperately trying to do it, and it really fits the stereotype of men just being obsessed with sex and just trying to get it whatever they can, wherever they can, with whatever they can, including the American Pie. And so, in that sense, they really have to learn to listen to women and actually understand what they're saying, and treat them like they're human beings and not just a goal to be achieved.
Do you think it's different because this movie was, made in like 20 years ago? Do you think it has any difference?
I wish I could say that we've evolved past that, but I don't think we really have, because, I mean, high school guys and college age guys are still, really eager to have sex, and they're, they'll do whatever they can to get it. But I wish I could say that we've evolved past that, but we can't.
All right, so I know in the movie that I watched, Ella Enchanted, a prince comes into the story, and normally when you see a prince, the girl is supposed to kind of like, oh my gosh, and kind of fangirl over it, but that wasn't the case. With Ella, she kind of blew him off at the beginning, so I thought that was like great because they didn't show her like, freaking out over just a guy. And they showed her very strong-willed and very intelligent, like I said before. So I think that was really interesting with like the stereotype of a princess is supposed to just do whatever the prince says and act, differently because the prince is in her, in her eyesight. So I thought that was interesting. All right, very interesting points. Thank you guys all for your thoughts. We'll be right back. Now we'll discuss how films and television portray non-traditional gender stereotypical roles. Ultimately, in Ella Enchanted, she was really independent, which is something I talked about earlier, so I thought that was really cool and obviously non-traditional with, in a princess. So, David, what about you?
Well, let's see. What I noticed in Fuller House is, it's kind of non-traditional, is the presence of a woman that's a CEO in this show, because traditionally you think of CEOs as being men. And so the woman that's the CEO, she's Kimmy Gilbler. She helps her friend DJ Tanner Fuller raise her 3 sons after their father dies. And so she's kind of an owner of a business, but it's a business that sells party planning supplies and stuff, which is usually seen as more feminine. It's, she's not the owner of a local Home Depot store or something like that, which you might see as more masculine.
And I think that's interesting because Kimmy obviously was 20 years or however long the first show was. She was kind of a ditz, I think, kind of a bit of an airhead. So I think that's really cool that they show her like now as a businesswoman.
Yeah.
Laura, what about you?
So in the Rugrats, there's some feminism portrayed. The mom of the twins she's pretty feminist, and she's a leader, and she wears like the feminine sign on her dress. Or her sweatshirt, whatever. And then also, there's a non-traditional household where it's a single-family household, and the dad has to kind of take on both roles as the mom and the dad and do things in the household, but also have a job.
Alani, what about you?
So kind of like in Laurel's movie, mine had Luke, who kind of also had the same role. So he owns a diner, and so I think that kind of plays into why he was kind of like the chef of the show. And so they would come home, and then he would be there cooking like this big dinner, which is usually seen as something that a female would do. And then on the flip side, in one of the scenes, Lorelai's car breaks down, and the mechanic that she goes to is a female, which is also something that's non-traditional. Usually, if you think of auto sort of stores, it's run by a male. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I know in the first series, the girls don't cook for themselves. They always go to that diner. So I thought that was cool too. Tristan, what about you?
I think it's interesting because the first half of the movie, I'd say, is all about, it conforms to the stereotypes, it reinforces them, and it kind of has to do that because the turning point about halfway through is when one character, Jim, nearly has sex, and inadvertently it's broadcast through his webcam to the entire school, and he doesn't actually end up having sex, and it kind of is a point of embarrassment for him in front of the whole school. But the reason I'd say it's a turning point is because he's not the one making the move. The foreign exchange girl that he would be sleeping with is the one making the move. And it kind of from there goes on to show that women can have that kind of agency in that way, and that men can, adapt and not just be that sort of dumb Neanderthal type that's just like, I want sex and, that's all it is, where, the different guys, they change as time goes on. And I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's cool how they flip those roles. For me, for Ella Enchanted, obviously the prince being, the guy that's going to take over the land was someone that actually didn't want that at all. So I thought that was kind of small but interesting. So, all right. That's all today, folks. Thanks for watching the Afternoon Report. I'm Elena Jakes. We will see you next time.